session for today. That is the virtual bike tour of Palo Alto. My name is Sandhya, and I'm the San Mateo County Advocate at Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition, and I'll be moderating this session today. You must be wondering why a person focused on San Mateo is moderating a Palo Alto session. Well, that has two reasons. One, I do work on a few projects in Santa Clara County, and second, I'm also a resident of Palo Alto, so that makes me kind of suitable. And it has been a pleasure working with all the speakers. I'll shortly be introducing you all too. So given shelter in place, it is unfortunate that we were unable to go on this ride in person with you all. Through this session, we want to replicate an in-person infrastructure ride where we do an 8 to 10 mile ride with participants stopping at various locations with different speakers, briefing us about these stops. We've released this route on our website for you to try on your own time. So please try out, and you can connect further with all the speakers if you have any questions. So let me begin with introducing who we have with us today. We have Sylvia Starlak. She won't be presenting today, but we'll be having her available to answer any questions during our Q&A session later. Sylvia is the Transportation Planning Manager for the City of Palo Alto. Her transportation planning career includes stints at Alameda County Planning Department, VTA's Congestion Management Program, Stanford's Commute Program, and Palo Alto's Safe Routes to School program. She's also a birth doula and childbirth educator. Sylvia, can you brief us about biking in Palo Alto?
Sure, thanks, Sandhya. I have a quick story about biking in Palo Alto, but it actually starts in Berkeley. During graduate school, my fiance said, let's go biking in Tilden Park. I was in love, so I said yes. Well, let's just say it wasn't very fun. I had not been riding really since elementary school. I was not in shape. I wasn't used to biking up hills. I was miserable. I did not get on a bike again for many years, sadly. Cut to 2008, when our family of four spent a summer in Switzerland, during which I did not ride a bike, but neither did I drive a car. Upon our return, I challenged myself to incorporate biking into my daily life. I discovered the bike racks the city had required Safeway to install, and I found low traffic routes, little known tunnels, and secret passageways in Palo Alto to ride to Costco and Target. I commuted to work on the Bryant Street Bike Boulevard and through the California Avenue Tunnel. You'll see those shortly. And now as city staff, I'm honored to help augment the infrastructure investments that this community has made that helped me incorporate biking into my own life. I remember a group, I am a member of a group that rides, now I'm a member that rides the Portola Loop. I climb up to Foothills Park, and I even bike up Old La Honda sometimes. I actually enjoy biking up hills with my husband now, especially when I get to the top first. And we look to biking as a key element of our quality of life and wellness in Palo Alto. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful introduction. Then we have Ken Joy. Ken is the chair of Palo Alto's Payback, that is the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee. He's been on the committee since 2013. He began commuting via bicycle in 1973 and continues to use that as his primary mode of transportation. Prior to Palo Alto, Ken lived in Davis, California, where bicycling is the cultural norm. For many years, he carried his bicycle aboard on Caltrain on his daily commute downtown to San Jose. Ken, can you brief us a little about the Payback?
So in Palo Alto, we have a committee which is advisory to staff, unlike many jurisdictions in Santa Clara County, where there are commissions appointed by city council. So our role's slightly different, but there's a steady group that's been in place for quite a while that reviews plans and brings items of concern to staff. And I should say to anyone who is a resident of Palo Alto, we certainly encourage community members to attend our meetings. They're held virtually now, of course, but we'd welcome your input.
Thank you, Ken. And lastly, we have Rosie Masterhazy, who is ready to go on a ride already. You can all see her here. Rosie is the Safe Routes to School coordinator at City of Palo Alto. She has spent the last 13 years working on Safe Routes to School programs across the country and has spent the last 5 years coordinating Safe Routes to School work at the City of Palo Alto. Rosie lives car-free in Palo Alto and rides for daily transport, recreation, to raise awareness about climate change, and most importantly, for her own personal health and wellness. Rosie, can you tell the audience what to expect from this session today?
Whew, I sure can. Thanks, Sandhya, and welcome everybody. We're so honored that you're here in Palo Alto, that our community, we get to show off all the infrastructure in our community, and that you're going to ride with us today. As you can see, I'm ready. It's 79 degrees out. It's beautiful. I brought my mask. I brought my water bottle. I brought my hand sanitizer. I brought my fizzy tablets, and I brought my lip balm. So I am ready to show off all of the great infrastructure we have on this ride. And I'm ready to also, we'll talk about bike boulevards and pandemic projects, lessons learned, and safe routes to school, and even like how whale sounds fit in the planning world. Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that this is a virtual ride. This is the first time we've done it. Oh, wait, hold on. I'm going to get off my bike and take off my glasses. Here we are, right? So, okay, I parked my bike and now I'm ready to tell you a little bit more. This is a first, and of course this would look so different in the field. I hope you'll all get a chance to ride with us at some point. This will be more narrative than normal, but we'll try to get to questions right away because I'm sure you'll have them. I invite you to draw your own conclusions so you can go back to your own communities with comparative examples. I want to say, in Palo Alto, we have a highly opinionated community, especially when it comes to transportation issues. So these opinions and narrative reflects my personal story and experience as a bike safety educator, as a city office of transportation staff, as a public health professional, as a former Detroiter, and as a mom to a 5-year-old, as an incoming Palo Alto Unified School District parent, and a Palo Alto resident for the last 4 to 5 years. So others may see the story in a completely different way, and hopefully during the comments, we can share a diversity of perspectives.
Okay, so without further ado, let us just get started. And if you have any questions, put them in the chat box and we'll get back to them after this ride.
All right. Okay, so I have the pleasure of getting us started. Ken and I are going to be tag teaming on this and showing off some of our favorite and or most controversial, interesting spots around the city. Our adventure begins at the mouth of the California Avenue Tunnel, located underneath the Caltrain overpass between High Street and Park Boulevard. This is a substandard tunnel built 50 years ago, prior to the current crush load of traffic, especially from students attending school in the morning and afternoon. On either end of what you can see is sort of a marine-themed underpass are a pair of chicanes that are jutting out diagonally from the walls and are separated by about 5 feet, which cyclists can ride around. And it also accommodates cargo bikes and trailers. This actually, even though it's substandard, was one of the infrastructure experiences that I had when I first came to Palo Alto and rode down Bryant Street Bike Boulevard, which Ken will talk about, and basically said, wow, if I was in Oakland before this, but I said, wow, if I lived anywhere in the South Bay or the Peninsula, I think I'd really want to live here. It was really just, it was great. And so at this infrastructure, as you can see, there's a sign directing people to dismount bikes. And these are posted at the entrances. This is confusing language relative to our municipal code. And so we've had some community controversy around that. And in 2018, the change in municipal code language flared up in our community in conversation with the local newspaper declaring whizzing cyclists putting pedestrians on edge. And every couple of years we have people, because it's so substandard, being concerned about this with justification. So out of these cost considerations, a few years ago, the city piloted an intergenerational dialogue to address this concern. And we worked with James Rojas, who was just presented with Placeit, and had an intergenerational community safety workshop where students and older adults identified low-cost mitigations to support safer passage for all modes of travel. These included adding art installations, light installations, sound installations, and here is where we also talked about adding whale sounds to people going through the tunnel. Post-COVID, we hope to move some of these ideas into the larger community forum, put them into practice. Ken, next.
Yeah, there we go. So when you come up out of the tunnel that Rosie just described, the roadway in front of you is Park Boulevard, which is the primary north-south bike artery on the west side of the train tracks. And it's one of Palo Alto's designated bicycle boulevards. We're around 10 blocks on either side of California Avenue. There are commercial buildings, but beyond that, there are fairly lightly trafficked residential stretches of the roadway. And features that are important there are diverters and closures to calm the traffic. And what's pictured here, though, is something that is a little bit different experience. You know, we had to deal with a lot of motorists heading out to 101 via Oregon Expressway, right turning to get out in that direction. And so we put down this green paint bike lane in the middle of the road that's flanked on one side by through traffic and on the right, the turning traffic. Now, I live on Park Boulevard and I travel this stretch all the time if I'm coming home from downtown Palo Alto, California Avenue. And I've gotten used to it, but this is a pretty daunting sight for someone who's in that interested but concerned cohort. And it really raises a question, how do you protect cyclists from right turning traffic in a way that really serves all? Next slide, please. So a little bit further down into the Ventura neighborhood where I live, we get to one of those diverters I mentioned, and also that Tony Stieber called out in the chat pod earlier today. And we turn and head up towards El Camino Real and cross over into the Barron Park neighborhood. And the closest elementary school for us is in Barron Park. And so Matadero Road is featured on one of the walk and roll maps that we've created to show people how to get to school on a bicycle. And a feature in Barron Park is that most of the streets lack sidewalks. So we had a restriping project at one point that removed the center line to give motorists a better comfort for passing bicycles, and also to widen the side of the road a little bit for pedestrians. Now, Matadero Road is a connector from between north-south arteries, Park Boulevard that we just mentioned, and another north-south artery a little bit further west. On the western edge of the Barron Park neighborhood is a long green space bordering the Stanford Research Park called Bol Park. And it has a shared use path that's used recreationally and for commuting by both bicyclists and walkers. At one end is Gunn High School and a connection to Foothill Expressway. On the other end is an outlet to the Research Park and Stanford University. And because there's this range of users, we've had some conflicts in the past, kind of similar to what Rosie described about the California Avenue Tunnel. There were some concerned pedestrians who convinced the city that we needed to put in signage and institute speed limits here. And this is an area that I think caused some consternation, kind of like what Rosie talked about earlier, but has had a fairly good result. Although really this path would better serve the community if it were wider and if it had different treatments for pedestrians and cyclists. I should add that along this stretch is a destination that's highly valued by some members of our community, a donkey corral that actually was visited by the animators from PDI when they were working on the movie Shrek. PDI had its studios at the time in one of those commercial buildings on California Avenue, on Park Boulevard. But I can't tell you whether they actually rode their bicycles over there to do their sketches. Next slide.
So Bol Park Pathway, come for the path, stay for the donkeys. I love taking my son down there, and I hope all of you get a chance to experience it as well. And from there, speaking of a path used by many different users, We arrive on Charleston Avenue at what appears to be like a street film's photo of Utrecht in the Netherlands, but what is actually one of the many bike racks at Gunn High School. Okay, so everyone, this is the Safe Routes to School slide. So I might spend a little more time on this just because there is so much to describe here and unpack as a Safe Routes to School coordinator, but I will try to clip through it as quickly as possible and acknowledge that just many people that have helped bring this kind of a picture into fruition. This is located off Arastradero and Miranda Avenue next to the Foothills Expressway. In our city, almost a third of the students bike to school in comparison with a national average of 1 to 2%. So we're more than 2.0. And Sylvia and I have always said we stand on the shoulders of giants. We have a 50-year partnership. Jose touched on that when he was presenting between the PTA and between the PTA, the district, and the city. We couldn't do it without that trifecta. And so this is one of our biggest transportation demand management success stories. And it's provided education programs that have supported a generation of PAUS students with what I like to call 21st century mobility skills. And when Shiloh early on mentioned in the survey, when kids start biking, it becomes a life skill. So our bike education programs are a part of our life skills curriculum. And we have compulsory bike education and pedestrian education from kindergarten through 8th grade. And that's a huge reason why we saw a growth. We didn't always have this, just like the Netherlands didn't always have their infrastructure, and Portland didn't always have its infrastructure. And we continue to strive for improvement. We're super appreciative of the legacy of volunteers that have inspired a new cohort of parent advocates to navigate the next phase of the program as it relates to COVID impacts, and not lose sight of the potential for the pandemic to make or break our program. Pandemic-induced motor vehicle traffic reductions and increased telecommuting give us an opportunity here, but are counter-mitigated by observable increases in speeding, new cohort of inexperienced cyclists, staggered school start times that could reduce the visibility of pedestrian and bike commuters, virtual as opposed to one-on-one education outreach, so we can't be more hands-on, greater need for bike repair as economic adversity affects our community and every other community. Black Lives Matter influence changes in traditional on-the-ground traffic enforcement policies so that the strategies are focused more on encouragement and education. And most importantly, the misperception that motor vehicles are personal protective equipment. And county guidelines, currently school reopening guidelines, and I will talk about this again, that are not even calling out biking and walking in their guidelines in their release. So it's very concerning because only vehicles are mentioned. Right now the messages that are going out to the students are, open your trunk, and they're not focused on walking and biking. And we have a huge amount of work to do to make sure that the district integrates pedestrian and bicycle language into its back to school guidelines. And next slide, please. So we now head to Charleston, Arastradero, the corridor project, which is a 15-year speed moderating work in progress, as Penny Elson calls it, consisting of a 4-lane to 2-lane road conversion with a center turn lane and landscape medians, upgraded and coordinated traffic signals, and buffered as well as separate protected bike lanes and shared use paths. So it's just kitchen sink. This project touches 7 public and private schools and is a key commuter link. Many years were spent, about 15 years, building a base of community supporters to move this project through. And these supporters were galvanized, just shout out again to former Safe Routes to School PTAC, Traffic Safety Representative Chair, Penny Elson. I continue to live very close to this, and it really has been night and day. It's been a fairly well-received project in the community, and so I'm really glad that the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, and We are still waiting to complete phase 3 of the project, which will add continuous bike lanes across El Camino Real and will complete the traffic calming from Charleston and San Antonio Road to Charleston and Middlefield Road. So like we've got like kind of 2 more really key pieces there before our work is done with Charleston and Arastradero. But it's been a real wonderful change for the better for bicyclists. Okay, so this is Waverley and East Meadow, right? Yeah, okay. So this is Waverley and East Meadow Drive. This project is part of our VERBS grant, and this is part of our VERBS grant project. This is located along the school corridor known as the Super Block. So it flanks a number of elementary schools around this park. I also live really close to this area, and we recently received a $1 million vehicles emissions reductions based at schools grant to upgrade East Meadow Drive and add potentially buffered or protected bike lanes, as well as upgrade the Waverley path, which is on the school property. So we will be collaborating with the school district to do that. I've seen some awesome examples of separate protected bikeways just recently when I was riding down Mission Boulevard in Hayward. Beautiful planters to replace the existing chain link and very uneven grading along the Waverley path between East Meadow and Charleston. And then lastly, along Fabian Way from East Meadow to Charleston as well. The hope is to also widen and improve the bike lanes to accommodate the many families living in the Altair developments and other residential areas around. So when you ask what's next for Palo Alto, it's going to be develop a community engagement strategy to hopefully, a good community engagement strategy to hopefully implement this project. Fingers crossed, I'm managing it. I could use all the good mojo you can throw my way. I think we'll get there. Next slide, please. Okay, so deep breath. This photo is a placeholder for sharing the lessons learned and mixed feedback from Palo Alto's first complete Streets Bicycle Boulevard project along Ross Road between the Oregon Expressway and Lewis Road. I like what Jose said in the last presentation, you know, we're not above challenging ourselves, striving for continuous improvement. And this is the place where I think many other communities have also experienced public blowback, and our community, our Office of Transportation team and the city coming back and saying, okay, now how do we, you know, how do we gather our lessons learned and figure out what to do next? So Ross Road featured a roundabout, spotted speed humps, chokers, and bulb outs. And these were placed along about a half to a mile stretch to moderate speed and support the safety of the nearly 500 students traversing parts of that stretch in the city. This roundabout was initially a four-way stop that students blew through all the time. So while I continue to use it and enjoy using it, as I am, I would say, a confident and experienced cyclist, many interested but concerned cyclists or people who didn't bicycle at all, you know, had significantly impacted the public support or opposition to the project. It was a polarizing project, and there were about 4 reasons that it was so polarizing. The first was that there was a limitation on the installation of diverters based on a city council directive, as well as separate bike lanes. There were also separate bike lanes due to a lack of community support for parking removal. So we couldn't put in diverters, and we couldn't put in separate protected bikeways because people didn't want to let go of their parking. The second was a community outreach process that followed the usual protocols for transportation projects, but in hindsight could have offered more by the way of explaining how significant the road changes would be. This was a bike boulevard, but people were picturing the Bryant Street Bicycle Boulevard when we talked about it, which was a boulevard with very few treatments on it. And so they weren't really aware of degree of changes that were being implemented, or they overlooked it. So the third was a controversy generated by the placement of the roundabout that you see here, that many residents found difficult to navigate due to concerns over merging, sightline issues, and tight turn radii. We implemented more than 21 projects and programs to try and further that, but in hindsight, it was too late by that time. Many residents had like doubled down in their feelings about whether they supported or opposed the project. And the fourth was that many cyclists were and still are uncomfortable riding 6 to 8 feet from the door zone toward the center of the travel lane, despite school-based safety messaging that encouraged cyclists to navigate in this fashion. There was a lot of intimidation and menacing driver behavior, causing parents and others to weave in and out of the bulb outs or cross the dashed lines, or excuse me, the striping, or ride on the sidewalk. So as uproar about the project reached a crescendo, more than 400 comments were made on the local Nextdoor thread with weekly coverage in the local newspaper. And ultimately, even though post-project data showed that vehicle volumes and speeds reduced on Ross Road and bicycle volumes increased, so yay, the positive data was generated at the cost of the departure of several staff, project expense overages, major infrastructure changes, a delay in the implementation of the rest of the Phase 2 Bicycle Boulevard plan, and most significantly, the erosion of public trust. I continue to hear comments about Ross Road every day of my job, and really hope we can apply those lessons to moving forward in terms of community outreach and engagement. Next slide, please.
So, as Rosie intimated, this is what people in Palo Alto, for the most part, think a bicycle boulevard looks like. In 1982, Bryant Street was established as the first bicycle boulevard in the nation. And it's due in large part to Ellen Fletcher. She was a city council member and a vice mayor, and it was her vision and persistence that really brought this to be. And both the boulevard and Fletcher Middle School have been named after her. It runs almost the length of town. It's the main north-south artery on the bay side of the train tracks. And in addition to its length, the main features of its success are the use of diverters and closures. You know, and because it's this iconic thing in town, every new facility is compared to it. And so it really raises the question of how do you do successful street designs given user perceptions? How do you take those perceptions into account? So next slide, please. So what we get to next on the ride is a tunnel that passes underneath the train tracks at Homer Avenue. And it's different quite a bit than the tunnel that we described at the onset. It doesn't have to go beneath Alma Street, so the grade change is minimal. And it's wide enough to comfortably accommodate pedestrians and cyclists, so you don't have those kind of conflicts. This is the main cross-barrier connection between downtown and people and places on the west side of the tracks. And it was put into place about 15 years ago when the Palo Alto Medical Foundation, PAMF, moved across to the other side of the tracks. You can see their buildings pictured in the background here. And it was a condition of the development of the new site for the Medical Foundation, primarily from business concerns. People in the downtown area were worried about losing customers, but in fact, I think it's proven to be much more than that, because it's really the best place to cross the tracks in town. I should mention a couple of things here. On Homer Avenue, which is otherwise a one-way street, there's a contraflow lane so that cyclists heading toward the bay coming out of the tunnel have a place to go. And also, as you can see pictured, there's a signal interval for bicycles and pedestrians to cross so that it's safe to get to the other side of the busy Alma Street. There are some geometric constraints, so sight lines are an issue and cargo bikes have a little bit of challenge, but you know, this is really a fabulous facility and one that I've used a lot. Next slide. When you come up out of the other side of that tunnel, you're on a class 1 bike path that runs parallel to the train tracks and goes down to connect to the Park Wilkie Bicycle Boulevard. The width is about the same as what we had out in Bol Park earlier in the ride, but for some reason there aren't the same kind of conflicts here. I'm not sure how to explain that really, but it could be that there's not a lot of residential building immediately adjacent to this. You know, on one side is the hospital, the shopping center, and the high school. And then on the other side, the train tracks. So maybe it's more dedicated for bicyclists. It runs from the University Avenue Caltrain station down to Churchill Avenue, where there's an at-grade crossing. And then it turns towards El Camino and ends at the driveway to Palo Alto High School. The city has plans to extend this up to El Camino and connect to the Stanford Perimeter Trail. I can say I rode this every day for years to get to the bullet train that ran between Palo Alto and San Jose. And it was one of the pleasures of my drive to be off the street like this. So, next slide.
All right, I hope you're all enjoying the ride here. We're taking a quick break, grab a fruit bar, get your banana out, take a drink of water. It's been a long ride. I hope you've been enjoying yourself. This has been a lot of fun. And we now are heading into what Ken was referring to as the Stanford Perimeter Trail on El Camino. This is a story of a future tense. This section of Stanford on El Camino between the shopping center and Stanford is the longest segment of public bicycle facility along El Camino in Palo Alto. The trail is a potential piece of the Bay to Ridge Trail and provides car-free bike traffic for those living west of El Camino Real. Once we improve the Churchill Bikeway, connection to the Caltrain path, folks living in the College Terrace and neighborhoods to the south will have a high-quality bike path route to downtown. The portion of the perimeter trail along El Camino Real is the only bicycle facility in Palo Alto that is located along El Camino Real. I don't know about you, but definitely most challenging stretch of road, I believe, in Palo Alto, from my experience. Although Embarcadero may be a close second. We may have an opportunity to add bike facilities with our upcoming El Camino Real safety project that I will talk about briefly in the next slide. The multi-use perimeter trail facilitates the walking and biking around areas of campus. And again, let's see. Yeah, so that's that El Camino.
And Rosa, can I interrupt? Sorry. I just want to say that the picture on the last slide was of a youngster riding his bicycle for the very first time. The dad said that that was the first day out on the path. So.
Oh, I love those stories. Thanks, Ken. So that on that wonderful note, and of course, what's so important to us in the next slide is making sure our kids are riding safely. We moved to El Camino Real and Cal Ave. So taking it down a couple notches onto a more somber note, as you see with the ghost bike, this is a location of a youth fatality. The first we had in 17 years. It occurred in March of 2020. And this occurred not as a part of a school commute, but during the evening hours as a sixth grader was biking on the sidewalk and was right hooked by a motor vehicle driver. So as a program that supports more than 4,000 daily bicycle-based commutes, youth commutes, my worst fears came true on that day. And what was even more challenging was that within the same week, shelter-in-place mandates prohibited our community from collectively grieving together and generating dialogue and support. So this really forced our Safe Routes to School team to have to balance this horrific tragedy with also efforts to halt all of our programs and completely change things to accommodate what was happening with shelter in place. And it's still been a challenge to, I think, grieve as a community about this, and I get a lot of feedback from parents about it. Despite our many limitations, I tried to be as one-on-one as I could be in reaching out to people who were calling me about this. That was an important strategy that I took on. The family put together a well-attended memorial walk at the Stanford Dish that Ken and I were both on. And again, yeah, we really just worked on in-person contact whenever possible and developing spaces for parents to, cry and support and be supported during our collective time of grief, especially our transportation safety representatives, some of them who lived along this stretch. So, Safe Routes to School is a household term in Palo Alto, and it really affected the community. During this time, the family also converted their loss into a campaign called Slow Down for Kids that we hope can help support safety projects proposed for El Camino Real between Stanford Avenue and Hanson Way. To date, we hope the renewed interest in cycling that we're seeing all across the country and the world, given the recent pandemic, will generate more growth in bicycling around town and Palo Alto and help further create a warrant for improvement of the local infrastructure to support safer streets for all. Next slide, please. So I want to conclude our presentation with a message of hope. I hope I didn't sound too negative. I was talking about projects with mixed feedback and, and how opinionated, our residents are about transportation. It's a really hot topic. And so we always have to make sure we're as responsive to people as possible and really aware of where the community's pulse is on some of these issues. I conclude with a message of hope. We hope to continue to maintain our gold level status as a bicycle friendly community. And we hope the renewed interest in biking as a fast and joyful and convenient way to get around town will continue generating a broader base to support the updates to our 2012 bicycle pedestrian transportation plan in 2021. It's my hope that our work, particularly with Safe Routes to School, the program I manage, will continue to build bridges by sharing best practices with less well-resourced neighboring communities such as East Palo Alto, so that we can collectively support addressing non-motorized transportation efforts from a regional perspective. We can't do that without the region, right? While Palo Alto may offer a blueprint for transformative transportation, we are a small part of a much larger conversation in best practices. So, what you see here is a very well-received project. In fact, I've gotten so used to sometimes residents coming up to me with furrowed brows that as I have been out on, as a Office of Transportation staff, this has been really a great success so far. This is our Shared Summer Streets program. This is along University and Cal Ave, and it's known as Summer Streets. It's been our effort to support local businesses by fast-tracking approvals for restaurants to offer outdoor dining and businesses to be open. We've had so much positive feedback from patrons and residents, with some restaurants even reporting the best sales they've ever had to date. So that is really encouraging, something that we wouldn't have been able to do before shelter in place. And when people come up to us and say, we just want to let you know, we'd love to see this become permanent, we say, contact City Council. Contact City Council. Here's the contact information for City Council. And so hopefully this success will help us move forward into phase 2 of our Bicycle Boulevard program and a number of other projects. And we welcome your feedback, and again encourage you to join us in real life for a ride through our beautiful and strongly engaged community. And that's all I've got. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rosie and Ken, for the wonderful bike ride. It was super informative, and it was nice to know some background and history of a few projects you mentioned. And I totally agree with you about the Cal Ave Summer Streets program. I live on Cal Ave, and it's like a daily routine for me to go out every evening, walk around, and just enjoy the street. In fact, I also met Rosie once at Cal Ave with her son drinking coconut water. So moving on, we have roughly 10 minutes-ish for Q&A. So let's jump right in. So Palo Alto has a great more share of people biking to school and to work. And as John just mentioned in the chat, Palo Alto is also updating their bike ped plan right now. So what's next for Palo Alto bike improvements?
So if I can mention a couple things that were discussed at the August payback meeting, there's work undergoing right now for a dedicated crossing over Adobe Creek to get to the other side of Highway 101. And another project that ties into what Jose was talking about earlier, Newell Street Bridge revamp that will help connect Palo Alto and East Palo Alto. So a couple of cross-barrier connections.
I'm also going to defer to our Transportation Programs Manager, Sylvia, here for her take on this question.
Well, there's finishing Charleston Arastradero is a big one. I think once we get continuous bike lanes across El Camino, that could be a game changer for many families. I know that there are parents who've said, you know, I'm not letting my kids ride until there's continuous bike lane. So that's important. The Adobe Creek Bridge, as mentioned, is really important. I think those two long-awaited projects are going to remove significant barriers for folks about bicycling. We have grants for a South Palo Alto Bikeways project that Rosie mentioned that she's going to be managing. I'll be supporting her on that. And we also have a grant for an El Camino Real pedestrian and maybe a little bit of bike safety project. And so those two grant projects are ones that we're going to need to do some community engagement on soon. So those would be really good ones for SVBC folks to help us with, and getting the word out when we get going with that community engagement. And the other thing is our bike and ped plan update. And that we're starting to work on, we're gonna have to claim the funding to fund the plan, and we're going to also need to talk about the framework for that plan. And I'm interested in folks' thoughts on bike plans these days, because this bike plan is gonna have to do a lot of work. It's gonna have to be a bike plan. It's gonna have to be a pedestrian plan. Will it also be a Vision Zero plan? Will it also have a Safe Routes to School plan in it? Will it also include green infrastructure? Is it a complete streets plan? What kind of a plan is it? I mean, I think everybody's gonna have some opinions. I think we're gonna have to really think hard about how do you create a plan that actually still makes sense if it has, many, many goals. So, yeah, thank you, Emma. I see that in the chat. And I was looking at Sunnyvale's active transportation plan when I was thinking about all of these questions. So yeah.
If I can jump in too, one thing that's we're facing in Palo Alto is grade separation. With a Caltrain electrification project, there's work going on now to figure out how we can change the way we get across the tracks. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a big challenge. How are we going to prioritize, not prioritize, but how does bicycle infrastructure fit in that context?
And to just touch up on Ken's point a bit as well, from my perspective, all of these issues, the bottom line is, how do we bridge the digital divide, for example, to engage adverse communities, how to engage all communities. When we were working on Bicycle Boulevards 1, like I said, we had like 21 different engagement efforts. We had ice cream socials, we dressed up in costumes as traffic cones, we pace biked out there on the streets. Of course, shelter in place is going to create a barrier, and we know that not everyone, I feel like online interaction is much more difficult for me. I feel less comfortable typing in a question that everyone can see. One-on-one outreach is a huge priority. So how can we do that in a way that also adheres to shelter in place, so that people feel like this is their project and that they are informed and they're excited about it? How do we also get an advocacy group that demographically is diverse? that consists of more young people. Like I saw this great Cupertino photo of Cherie and the high school students at a city council meeting. We need more youth involvement. We just need more young people in general, new families. Safe routes to school is the cornerstone of our transportation programs and policies. And if we don't have this new cohort of parents coming in and advocating as strongly as their predecessors have, which is how we've gotten what we've gotten, we do stand a chance to lose some ground. So,
Rosie, would you say that interested but concerned cohort is kind of like a silent majority? Do you hear enough from that group when we make these sort of plans?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a preschool parent, always riding like my cargo bike around, and always just really surprised that most people for trips of 2 miles or less are still thinking that it's more convenient for them to drive. And I don't, I try to model behavior. That's all I can do, and be joyful and show people how to do it. But the interested and concerned, the idea still that you should ride 6 to 8 feet from the travel lane so that you're visible. It's a new idea for people. So we're out there educating and encouraging preschool parents and new families and trying to model behavior. I would love to set up some monthly family rides or even weekly rides so that people know they have an opportunity to plug in and learn how to use Ross Road and have that eye-opening experience where they try it out and oh my gosh, they were less scared, right? And they were able to be seen and be safe and ride in a straight, predictable line. So really capturing, making the shift from interested but concerned to confident and experienced is a huge part of the work. And we don't want to get demoralized at this point.
I like to get some of those no way, no how folks too.
Yeah.
Right? Pull them along if we can.
Well, we're getting them.
Soon.
I mean, we are absolutely getting these stories of people who are saying, I haven't picked up a bike or I'm a first time rider and this is awesome. And it's our job to make sure that they have the tools they need to ride safely and confidently. Because nothing will hurt a movement faster than a collision, a serious collision. So fingers crossed that we can just continue to implement our curriculum in our school district and in the community at large. So people are riding safely and confidently, and we can continue to grow our program at the rate of 1% per year, which is what we have been experiencing for the last many years. So numbers.
Yeah, and just to kind of jump on that, I mean, part of the reason why I told the story that I did is about when people hear, and Jose mentioned this in his session too, when people hear stories like, I wasn't always a cyclist, like people see you cycling and they think, oh, you've always been a cyclist, you're one of those people. And it's like, actually, no. I really was not biking until after I had children, until after, I knew how to ride a bike. And one of the things that I'm hoping that, I don't think city staff can do this on their own, but I'm hoping that maybe SVBC or somebody can help with like an older adult, safe routes for older adults. Part of the issue is we're going to have an older demographic here, as we know our population is just getting older, and how do we move those folks who have basically turned to a car all the time, like me and Jose, who grew up in LA, you have to break that. How do you break that? But in a good way. And so Safe Routes has really kind of led me to think about these things as like, well, actually, biking can heal so many of the things that are plaguing us, health-wise, helps me with my weight maintenance, like when I have to take a longer route, I'm like, hey, that's more calories I get to burn, so if you think about biking not as like, why wouldn't I just jump into my car because it's so much faster and easier? I'm like, well, I'm going to take my bike because, I want to eat out later, so
it is actually faster.
Well, and it's faster. And it's faster.
As one of our former mayors said, I would have driven, but I didn't have the time.
Exactly.
That's pure Palo Alto. And all of these comments that are scrolling are so heartfelt and kind. And I'm reading like, we need more Rosies everywhere. Thanks for the evangelism. But the bottom line is, the authenticity of your message is what's going to resonate most with people. And it's the human side, it's the stories. I don't want to lose my objectivity, as a parent and as an advocate. And sometimes we can get so swept away with our own, righteous anger around biking, #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions, single occupant vehicles, the #1 source of injury for kids ages 5 to 15, also, vehicle-based collisions, and just make sure that our message continues to be very relatable in the way that Sylvia talked about and Jose talked about. You have to be a person first, and then an advocate, and a city staff second. Right,
there
Sylvia?
there are quite a few interesting questions and comments in the chat box, but we're at time and hence we're unable to get to the rest of the questions. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much, Rosie, Ken, and Sylvia, for keeping all of us engaged.
We just wish you could have joined us in person.
Yeah.
Yes, hopefully soon we can do the same ride in person.
All right, right on.
Special thanks to David Cole for putting this ride together, and thanks to Gunn, Paul Sakuma, David Cole, Sylvia, and Ken for all these amazing pictures that we had today. Please do try out the ride in your own time and let us know if you have any questions. And before we move on to wrap up for the day, which Shiloh will take up in a minute, I'd like to remind you that Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition is the only nonprofit fighting for safe and comfortable biking across both San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. So support from members like you makes up 1/3 of our operating budget, and especially during these times, it's really, really important. And that helps us and enables SVBC to educate and advocate through events like these. So if you're not a member, join today. I'll post the link shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandhya. And thank you so much to our Palo Alto team. That ride was awesome, and makes me think we should do more of that kind of virtual stuff. It actually works, and it was great to get a tour of the city and get an insider's view of what's going on there. So thank you, guys. I wanted to piggyback on something that Rosie said, and it underscores the theme of the day that you all are probably picking up on, and that really is about getting people involved. Rosie said, look, if you like this, communicate with the city council, and that's been the theme of the day. It is, how do we get involved, and in particular, how do we get a diverse community involved and engaged? So that's, if you saw that theme, that is absolutely what we were going for today, is for us to all be figuring out and thinking about how do we get involved in our own city, because this stuff is very local. When you show up and you stand up and you support this stuff, it makes a difference. So with that, I want to thank you for joining day one. Would love it if you would write in the chat box what your favorite part of the day was, so that we can all be sharing the good takeaways that we got out of the day. We also next have a virtual happy hour for networking, and we hope that you'll stick around and be broken up into groups again so that you can meet more folks and rub elbows virtually. And before we go, I wanted to hand things over